I often say, and I will end with today, demand more from your God. If you're a woman who thinks you have a loving relationship with a sweet father figure Yahweh, or a messed up sense of love and connection with his son Jesus Christ, think again. Go over for yourself in as much context as you want the stories I cover today, and you tell me how you can continue to arrive at that conclusion other than incorrect indoctrination and reinforcement from things like confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance. If this God were real, you would be one of the last things he cares about. And for you men who take pride in supporting your wife and raising your daughters, look at the text. Look at what is said. They are second-class citizens at best. It is not just a difference in biology. It is not just a difference in roles and expectation from God. It is a difference in the view of their value. So again, all around I say, demand more from your God. They birthed nations, saved spies, stood next to their husbands no matter the cost, fulfilled prophecies, and even stood at the foot of the cross. Without them, there is no story, and yet the story barely remembers them. Welcome to Women in the Way, something I wanted to make its own series, and then we would do deep dives on each of these women, and I still may do that, but to kick it off, I want to cover a large handful. Let's do maybe 12, 13, or 14 of these women that were used, erased, or vilified after their purpose had been served. They were raped to produce heirs. They were sacrificed to fulfill vows, mocked for grieving and cursed for speaking, and killed for existing at the wrong time, in the wrong body, in the way of man's mission or of God's. You've heard about Job, but what about his wife? If anything, she's made out to be a bad guy. You have quoted Paul many times, but what is the name of the daughter that was sacrificed by her father so he could win a battle? And no, this episode isn't to celebrate the noble women of the Bible. It's about reckoning with how the Bible treated the people it needed most, and what that says about the morality of the text itself. And we'll start with an easy one, the one I already mentioned, Job's wife. Notice that we don't even have a name for her. That's how little she matters. Job is perfectly righteous. At least that's what the Bible says. So it is equally unfair to him, but at least he gets proper representation. See my video on Job if you want to deeper dive into this, because here come all the apologetics, but it is truly an inexcusable story. I can't believe it even made it into the Bible. And we're not going to rehash the story here, but let's just think about Job's wife's perspective. She is married to the only righteous man that has ever existed. They have many kids, they're prosperous, life is going well. They seemingly have been blessed by this God for their upright behavior, which is how it worked back in the Old Testament. You were blessed physically in this life because there was no promise of some reward of heaven or afterlife. So nothing wrong with that. They're being blessed. They have a good life until, of course, the accuser wants to have a conversation in the heavenly council with God and say, hey, have you thought about tempting this man to sin? You know, something that is claimed God will never do. To which God has to give his permission. And he does multiple times, upping the ante to the point where, of course, we know the story. Job is horrendously sick, being literally and physically tortured. He loses all of his possessions, and most importantly, aside from even the servants that we won't get into, his children are murdered by God. There's no other way of saying that. Oh, but it was the devil or Satan or the accuser, only with express permission from God to do so. So he loses everything. We know the story, and he goes and he has to be humbled before God, and God goes on his big, long speech about how powerful he is, and cool, what a big guy. But what about Job's innocent wife? The only framing we get from her is that she's mad with Job, and she tells him to curse God and die. I remember being in Sunday school. I remember being in church and hearing it from the pulpit. Her positioned as the one without faith, as the agent of the devil trying to get Job to sin. You mean having a human reaction? Because despite him being innocent and them knowing that, this God is literally torturing and killing everything they know and have? She's not allowed to have a moment and be like, Job, what the hell is going on? Do you think there's anyone today that would just take this? Because he's not communicating with her. Of course he's not. And as soon as she is used for her piece as temptress, because this is the history of the Bible, starting with Eve and going all the way through, women are there to get in the way, to make a man's job harder, to take him away from his God. And it's no accident that that is how she is framed within this story. We hear about Job's grieving. Do we hear about hers? No. She disappears from the story too as soon as everything goes well because Job has finally bent the knee again. And enter Christian apologetics with, she didn't die. God left her alive. For what reason? Because God had to give Job more children again to make things right, because that's what you do. You kill a handful of kids and no problem, you just give them more. Quick side tangent. I remember I was having a conversation with Trent Horn and Job came up and I slip of the tongue said, Job got everything doubled. And Trent said, not the children. I think that's important. Putting a value on their life that they can't just be doubled to be made up for. He got the same number back. Oh, so the only thing God didn't bless with bountifulness is the children that he murdered? I can't believe how people can twist these things up. But look at me doing what the Bible does and continuing to focus on not the woman here. So again, she disappears from the story as soon as she has served her purpose as an additional accuser of Job, equating her essentially at the same level as the enemy. And for what? Being a grieving mother. So this is the focus of today's video. Let's keep going. Some of these you're going to be very familiar with, and some I bet you haven't even heard of. But let's get to another common one here, kind of hanging around in the early days. Let's go to Hagar. Another story that apologists have completely flipped into supposedly something beautiful, but it is not. This is Abraham. This is the patriarch of the faith. And when God's promise for a child in their later years stalls, Sarah gives their slave Hagar to Abraham. Now, we can talk about how that was a common ancient custom, just like slavery, but it is clearly rape. Hagar was raped by Abraham, a guy who owned slaves and was willing to kill his children. This is the friend of God, and she serves her purpose dutifully. She bears him a son, which only ignites Sarah's rage to the point that she starts to abuse her so bad that she flees, a pregnant rape victim, into the wilderness because anything is better than what is happening to her. Only for what? God to send an angel to send her back to her abusers. It's not rescuing her. It's literally continuing to subject her to slavery and further abuse after she's already been raped. These are the facts. But then, when Abraham and Sarah finally do have Isaac, we can't have Hagar around anymore, nor Ishmael. So Sarah convinces very weak Abraham here to send them away. This is a son of Abraham, but it doesn't matter because he's not a legitimate son. So who cares? Abraham doesn't stand up for him or for Hagar. And again, to Abraham's mind, they are sent into the desert to die. Now, God does rescue her, and that is where all the apologetics jump up and say, look what a good God, he obviously cares about Hagar. It's hilarious to me that if God does anything resembling anything good despite all of the horror that he obviously just did, the story becomes beautiful. Do we need to give this God a cookie for not having her die too after her enslavement and rape and abuse and discardment? Bravo, God. Hagar here is a piece of meat. She is someone that had nothing, was owned by another human being, was in a position to have her body given away to her master by the master's wife. Something that happened in the antebellum South, by the way, that if you saw on 12 Years a Slave, you would be absolutely disgusted with. But when it comes to your biblical hero, it's, oh, look how God's working. Used for her body, then blamed for her presence, and then abandoned. This is why I call it women in the way. Let's focus on a woman that many even call evil. She's a trickster. She's a whore. I've heard everything about this woman. Her name is Tamar. Tamar is married to Judah's son, Er. He dies, and so as per custom, it falls to the next son in line, Onan, to produce an heir. But Onan doesn't want to do this, so he spills his seed. That one stupid verse has led to so much trauma because it's really the only verse you can use about not masturbating. And so every Protestant preacher in at least the 80s through now has used that verse to say you can't masturbate, causing endless shame spirals and everything else for all of these poor young people. But I digress. Purity culture is so sick to me. I have to bring it up when it's clear. But back to the story. Judah promises the third son, but that never goes through. And so Tamar is desperate and abandoned. And I'm not excusing her next action, but under the circumstances from the male rules that she is trapped under, it's honestly the only thing she sees to do to survive. But she tricks Judah, the father. She disguises herself as a prostitute, because these wonderful men of God still had absolutely no problem sleeping with prostitutes. That's never the part of the story that is focused on. In fact, we know this man is pure evil because when she becomes pregnant, he threatens to burn her, which would have been fine, by the way, fine with everybody, with the entire society and God's laws. The only reason he doesn't is because she then can prove that is his child. And of course, kids mean power, so he's not going to burn the source of that. No punishment for Judah, and Tamar becomes the warning somehow in the Bible of, again, the temptress, the prostitute, the whore. By the way, that leads to twins, and one of those twins becomes part of the line of David that would get us to Jesus. It's really fun to look at how messed up the actual lineage of Jesus is, the supposedly pure bloodline that we needed to get to him. But anyways, let's talk about Dinah, a forgotten victim. It's amazing we even have her name. Dinah is the daughter of Jacob and Leah. She's raped by Shechem, a prince. He wants to marry her and even offers a bride price. And Jacob's sons lie. They pretend to agree, only to murder all of the men in Shechem's town while they are recovering from circumcision. What an insane story. Dinah is mentioned at the beginning and the end. She never speaks. We never hear from her. Of course not. She is just a rape victim that could allow these events to happen. And again, apologists point to this like, look, they cared. They went and avenged. Yeah, because the father's property was destroyed, his daughter's virginity. To the father, it's no different than if someone comes in and cuts up one of his oxen, at least in terms of how the law plays out. The perfect objective law set by the Most High God. And we have plenty of these examples of these poor women that just go through horrendous things only to be used as some kind of a plot point and nothing further. Here's another example. This one doesn't even get a name because she's not from such special lineage. This is the Levite's concubine. So you have a Levite, and he takes a woman as a concubine, a sex slave. She leaves him. We could probably guess because of abuse, but that is not spelled out. And like all men in this Bible, that cannot be happening, so he goes to retrieve her. I guess the pro here is that God didn't send an angel to send her back to her abuser, but whatever. And then we get a weird story that isn't talked about much, and it's pretty similar to what we see with Lot and his daughters. They stop in a town on the way home after he has retrieved her, and the town men supposedly surround the house because they want to rape the Levite. But the host, who, again, the most important thing here is always to be a gracious host, offers his daughter and the concubine. They end up only giving up the concubine. She is raped all night and then killed. And get ready, trigger warning, then the Levite carves up her body into pieces, dismembers her, and sends her body parts to the tribes of Israel. This leads to civil war and the near genocide of the tribe of Benjamin. She is a pawn. She is a plot piece. Abused, betrayed, violated, tortured, killed, dismembered, and nameless. But let's move on and talk about another completely innocent victim. I have told the story of Jephthah many times. The 30-second recap is that he wants to win a military battle, so he makes a deal with God that he will sacrifice the first thing he sees should he arrive home successful from his battle. Now, we can argue about the apologetics of this all day, but it is beyond crystal clear that this God with foreknowledge knows it will be his daughter who's the first thing to come out the door, and that this God takes the deal, that this God gives him the military victory, and that this God does expect him to hold to it because he never lets him out of the deal, like we hear about Abraham and Isaac. So, if that's your excuse with Abraham and Isaac, that God stopped it, was never going to happen, therefore God didn't want it to. If God doesn't stop it here, what does that mean? God wanted it to happen. He allowed it. He accepted the deal. He even arranged for it to happen, and he does. He kills his daughter, his innocent virginal daughter, meaning she's younger. I've literally heard excuses like, well, the text says that he weeps. He's not some monster. This meant a lot. He cared for his daughter, and he killed her for a military victory. Stop focusing on whatever you think is one pretty part of the story and see it for what it is, and let's see it from her angle. A daughter who, if her dad did care about her to the point of crying when he has to murder her, which is more than what we hear Abraham did, so I guess there's that. Maybe she even loved him back. Of course, we don't hear about the mother. She was probably so worried for her papa who went off to war. Imagine her joy as he comes back and she comes dancing out of the house with tambourines, so relieved that her dad is home. Only for that father, the one person in the world who was supposed to protect her, to inform her, sorry, I needed to win this battle. So I made a deal with God, our loving, perfect, just God. And now I have to sacrifice you. I have to end your life for my personal gain, which the daughter merely begs for a couple months to mourn her virginity. Really, what that's saying is the lack of her potential life, her ability to marry and become a mother and have a family, the only value that was available for her back then. But after 2 months, she does return, and he does kill her. And this is in the Bible, and Christians make excuses for it. And the smart Christians will say, read the very end of Judges. In that day, there were no kings, so man did what was right in his own eyes. Okay. There was also a lot of other periods with no kings. That is simply just a little transition piece to get us into the books that follow, the monarchies. Not that anything got better then either, which is so important to understand and totally robs God of any responsibility. God is blessing military victories for people who say they will kill something that's important to them. He's no different than the other Canaanite gods. By the way, do we know his daughter's name? Of course we don't. She didn't win the military battle. Why would we care about her name? Let's move on to Michal. Poor Michal. What do you think is worse, being Saul's daughter or David's wife? She got to be both. She was just one of David's many wives. She's a special one because she is, again, the daughter of the current king, Saul, at the time, and she is used for a political alliance. We won't get into all the drama where she is given to another man first and then taken back by David. Truly, just a piece of meat, a bargaining chip between men for power. But watch any retelling of the story of David, and his heart is yearning for beautiful Michal, and she's so excited to get to marry David. This is ridiculous. But despite that, she helps David. She even saves David's life. A man who is out probably raping other women like Bathsheba, mutilating hundreds of men for their foreskins just to pay for her in the first place. What a great guy. But she protects him. It's her duty. She lies for him. She saves his life. And what is her payback from David later on? We have that episode of David dancing near naked, if not truly naked, in the street like a buffoon, worshiping his God, which we're supposed to find beautiful. That David, that beautiful poet's soul, couldn't hold back his wonderful love for God. And he didn't care what people thought, but he did care because Michal criticizes him for it. But how dare she talk to the king like this? So what does David do? He rebukes her, and she is punished with barrenness. Again, the only value that she would have had. How dare she be unimpressed with his spiritual spectacle? And then we don't hear from her again, of course. While we're on David, let's get to Bathsheba, another woman in the way. Now, the text does not say as much, but if you just take into account the power dynamic here, the fact that Bathsheba was a married woman, it seems obvious that she is taken by the king, not some sexy illicit affair. And I don't know whose plight is worse, hers or Michal's. You definitely didn't want to be married to David. Don't forget that God has all of David's wives raped in public as punishment for David. But she becomes pregnant from what is most likely David's rape, and then her husband is killed by her abuser, David, and then as punishment, her child is killed. How do we never talk about this more? Most likely raped, overpowered, or at least a power dynamic. Husband killed, baby killed, all because of what David did. But later she at least gets to become Solomon's mother, so there's that. How does anyone think this is a good God? And these aren't just descriptions of men in the Bible. Most of what I've covered so far has been prescriptions by God. God sending Hagar back. God giving Jephthah the victory and having him go through with the sacrifice. God choosing the punishment of the baby dying and the wives being raped. I mean, come on. Now, there are some women that are represented kind of well in the Bible. Funny enough, Rahab, a prostitute, is one of them. We are supposed to be infatuated with Rahab's faith, which I don't understand that part of the story. She's clearly playing both sides to see who's going to win, and then she can be on the good side of either. If that's faith, cool. Self-protection makes a lot of sense to me, but the story is clearly spun so that we have glory to Yahweh. She even later marries into Israel, but how is she referred to in this Bible? Rahab the prostitute. I cover it quickly just to say, even when a woman gets a chance to do something or be something important in the Bible, still she has to be sexualized and reduced. This is the same even for Mary Magdalene. She follows Jesus. She supports Jesus financially. She's even the first to witness the resurrection, even though her only job is to go tell the men, the important ones. And later, Christian tradition would wrongly label her as a prostitute. We were so close, and this one's not so much on God, but just on your typical Christian man, where she gets reduced and erased by misogyny. But oh well, what can you do? To be fair, I recognize you can count on like one hand all the women that get any kind of decent attention in the Bible. Oh, I almost forgot, similar to what God did, Lot's wife. Lot's wife doesn't get a name, and she only is there to be a cautionary tale. We don't know her motivations, we don't know her feelings about the fact that she and her family had to flee from utter apocalypse. We don't know what caused her to look back, but she looks back, to which God turns her into a pillar of salt. How ridiculous, small, and petty. This is your God of grace? Well, he told her not to, Brandon, so I mean, kind of on her. Has God ever told any of you not to do something that you did? Aren't you glad he didn't turn you into a pillar of salt? And I bet when you broke his word, it probably wasn't in the midst of having to flee for your life from the only place you've ever known. The judgment from Christians on anyone in the Bible that does anything bad and then gets rightfully, justifiably punished from God is crazy to me. But again, she's just a little plot piece. Nothing real, nothing important. We needed her to die so that more women can do more bad things. Lot's daughters can rape him, which does lead to Jesus, another fun piece of lineage. Let's do two more and let's move to the New Testament. I can't not talk about these two. I'm sorry if I've done it before. The first is the Canaanite woman, maybe the best example we have about Jesus's true intentions and character. Also spun by apologists about testing her faith and all of this nonsense. But Jesus is crystal clear. I'm not here for you. He ignores her. He doesn't want to do this. He tries not to do this. He calls her a slur. She's a dog. She's an other. She's a lesser than. And only when she humiliates herself publicly for his enjoyment, calling herself indeed a dog, but doesn't a dog also get the scraps that the children drop? It pleases him. In a way, some sick tyrant king might be pleased by his court jester who he was about to have murdered, but now extends a favor to instead. And so he does the healing. It wasn't even for her, it was for her daughter. She was desperate, and she was tenacious, and she was willing to do anything to protect the person that she loved. And in that moment of utter need, the God of the universe in human flesh, who has a chance to show that he is truly here for all people of all backgrounds and ethnicities and sexes, says no the first couple times and calls her names because of where she's from. And then Christians have the audacity to talk about the love of Jesus. And we'll end with the woman caught in adultery. This one's easy, Brandon. She's a sinner. She's a slut. She's a whore. Who cares? It was right for them to drag her before Jesus. And look at Jesus' ethical brilliance here as he gets her out of this jam. This story is one of the stupidest, most ridiculous stories, even though it is constantly bragged about by Christians on Jesus' character and wit and all kinds of stupid things. You know what I see here? I see two people that committed a sin, and only one, of course only one, brought before the crowd to have the punishment of that sin carried out. Where's the man? No one cares. They're excited to do what their God gave them permission to do, which is to stone and kill the whore. And it's not a lesson about justice. This isn't Jesus solving for how these things should be dealt with in the future. This is a one weird off where Jesus gets himself out of a jam that he, if you believe he is actually God and was there at creation and is the same as part of the Trinity, one with the Father, etc., was the very one who gave these people the law and permission to do this. But radical human version of Jesus can't be seen doing this too, and so he has to find a fun way out of it, and he does, and bravo. Once again, let's be so happy for this God. but we don't see justice. Jesus doesn't say, why did you bring her and not the man? Jesus doesn't back up, yeah, I said this, now kill her. Also, Jesus' advice in general, let he who is without sin throw the first stone. If we were to actually apply this to law and order, our society would completely break down. Is he actually promoting that no one should ever be punished because everyone is guilty? The story is riddled with issues. But again, one of them is the focus on the woman, the sexualized, incorrect, sinful woman being deserving of death, which, by the way, is never countered. Jesus never says, no, we shouldn't kill her. This is wrong. She doesn't deserve it. He just plays some semantic game. But that's it. We could do more. I had more written down, and each of these probably deserves its own 30 to 40 minute episode anyways, but I hope that you can see here clearly in this internal critique of the nature of God, right? That's ultimately what we're doing here. Yeah, we can talk about some of the ridiculousness of the laws and what that says about the morality of the day, but I'm not just dumping on the ancient past with a 21st century view. I'm dumping on the idea of an omniscient and all-powerful God that we equate with love and justice, who in most of these situations directly did the harm to the woman, or at least condoned it, or at best ignored it. An entire religion that in its telling, in its morals, in its description, shows just how little this God cares about half of his creation. And every time I talk like this, I get a bunch of super alpha men in the comments that are like, look at you, you prissy, you've gone woke, what are you, some kind of a feminist? If it makes me a woke feminist to point out that the God you serve of all creation, equality, justice, and love has done a horrific job in general, but especially for the female sex, then sure, give me those titles. But is that your best defense to the obvious horror and immorality of your obviously ancient tribal warfare patriarchal God? How little you have to stand on. These women were collateral damage. They were in the way. They were pawns. They were plot devices. So what do we do with this pattern? We stop pretending it doesn't exist. We stop reading these stories from the top down, trying to give as much credit to God or the king or the prophet, etc. Your God obviously needed these women, yet he couldn't even treat them as equal. I often say, and I will end with today, demand more from your God. If you're a woman who thinks you have a loving relationship with a sweet father figure Yahweh, or a messed up sense of love and connection with his son Jesus Christ, think again. Go over for yourself in as much context as you want the stories I cover today, and you tell me how you can continue to arrive at that conclusion other than incorrect indoctrination and reinforcement from things like confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance. If this God were real, you would be one of the last things he cares about. And for you men who take pride in supporting your wife and raising your daughters and being a modern man who understands equality for all, demand more from your God. Look at the text. Look at what is said. They are second-class citizens at best. It is not just a difference in biology. It is not just a difference in roles and expectation from God. It is a difference in the view of their value. And it's made crystal clear here and in 1,000 other texts that we could go through. The irony here is that those nasty little men who are so insecure that they do things like try to attack my masculinity or talk about how ridiculous I am when I stand up for women, they are the ones closest to God's heart if we look at the stories that show his nature best. So again, all around I say, demand more from your God. That's it for today. Tuesday we'll have some new topic. I'm not sure what it is yet. I think we need to get to another fundraiser. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, and sometimes people avoid it because you think there might be pressure to give. No pressure. Come and watch and support. All of the ad money goes towards a good cause. You can do real good just by showing up. I'll see you Tuesday with that episode, and until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, Shawn, and Steve; my Humanist heroes: Criagh, James, Jared, Christy, and Matthew; my atheist advocates: Adquitar, Caleb, Dan, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas; as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people.